So the first panelist we're going to have speaking today is Todd Mitchem. Todd is who's in the middle. Todd has actually been active in the cannabis industry and has been a well-known cannabis reformer in Colorado for a number of years. Currently, he is active with a company called Decorum. Decorum specializes in advising both the government and also private sector actors on how best to set up the regulatory environment for cannabis, which I think is a very interesting subject because, as you all know, the actual, God is in the details, and in the case of cannabis, God is in the regulations. Exactly, you can vote to legalize cannabis, but actually how that gets implemented on a detailed basis from a regulatory perspective is extremely important. So Todd is in the middle of those type of discussions.
I guess I got the short straw. I'm going to go first. So welcome everybody. If you can't see me over here and you want to move kind of down, it's a little of an awkward setup, but let me tell you about, just quickly, I'm not going to take up a whole 10 minutes because I really want to get to your questions. I think that's what's most important. Whether you're a candidate or you're just someone concerned about where marijuana regulation is going, how each state is dealing with it, happy to talk about all of that. I will tell you, though, quickly how I got into this space. A lot of people will ask me, how did you end up working in the marijuana industry from a corporate life? It was kind of because of my mother. I know that sounds counterintuitive because when I was 16, my mother would have thrown me out of the house for marijuana. Fast forward to 2009, my mother was diagnosed with a second cancer. It was a terminal cancer. She was given about 6 months to live. A nurse whispered in her ear one day after a treatment, "You should get your hands on some weed, it will help you die." So my mother did that. Now, being the rebellious woman she is and was, she literally started growing it in her house. So when I asked her, I said, Mom, you live in Ohio, you could go to jail. She goes, "What are they going to do, kill me?" No big deal. So she grew it, made it into muffins. It was my great-grandmother's recipe, and she's turned over in her grave several times. But essentially, she made it into these muffins. She ate a quarter of the muffin a night. Long story short, that was in 2009. She's still alive today. So in 2012, when Amendment 64 passed, I made a decision to jump into the industry full force. Since then, I've seen the regulatory structure, the environment around it, from both Democrats and Republicans change dramatically. At the federal level, our firm is working on many different federal issues with marijuana. It is not a simple solution. Everyone thinks it's as simple as legalization. It really isn't. We moved out of an era of activism and sort of advocacy, and we moved into an area now of dealing with deep politics and money, which also includes pharmaceutical industry players and people in that space who are trying to hold it at bay. The reason is because in a state like Colorado, for example, we always talk about the good that's happened in the industry. Very few people talk about the fact that prescription drug prices have dropped by an enormous percentage, which has created a bit of an issue inside the pharma space. They start to look at these different states and how they have to compete, and it requires them dropping drug costs, which is not good for their business. So they also struggle with, at the federal level, how to get their arms around legalization from the perspective that would protect it in their world, which is not going to happen. When you can grow your own medicine in your house, it tends to make it a little wobbly at the federal level to try to stop that if you're a lobbyist for Pfizer. But what we are seeing is that the political climate currently, a lot of people were hopeful that Trump would be that sort of radical president that would legalize marijuana very quickly in the spirit of business. That obviously didn't happen, and now we're seeing a lot of change going on with Jeff Sessions. I do have to say this, though, it's really positive in some respects. Jeff Sessions, by turning over the jurisdiction back to states' attorneys and really forcing them to look at it, he really created a stir in Washington, and now legislators are forced to look at it a little differently. He's basically said to Congress, "This is your fault, and you need to fix it, and I'm not going to protect it anymore." Now, that doesn't mean he's going after it, but it also doesn't mean that he's going to take the responsibility for it, which is a fascinating turn of events. It gives us a little hope because now we're working with lawmakers at the Capitol to actually move this forward. I can tell you this, it's good to be a libertarian, even though not everyone believes that about us, but let me tell you, on the Republican side, they're starting to look at this from a business perspective differently. But the Democrats are failing on it. They're starting to look at it as only a social justice issue. And even though that is a really important part, medically, veterans should be able to get access. And And people who went to jail for selling a dime bag of marijuana 10 years ago should definitely not be in jail for that in a state like Colorado. I agree with all that. However, that's not the big picture. And if we don't look at it from an economic development standpoint, in other words, right now the marijuana market, illegal and legal, makes up for about 90 to $100 billion. Legally, the market's only at about 7 billion, technically speaking. So we've got a lot of headspace and a lot of coverage that we could still grow into. Our estimates on our team are that we could be looking at, with legalization of marijuana and hemp, by the way, because they both fit under cannabis, we could be looking at 3.5 to 4 million jobs in the next 2 to 3 years, with a 90 billion revenue stream, enormous amounts of dollars to put into infrastructure. And one of the examples of that is here in Colorado, that home prices around dispensaries actually went up in the last 5 years, not down. So if you look at an area, if you're familiar, I'm assuming a lot of you are from Denver or from this region, the strip of Colfax Avenue, as an example, was a desolate, dangerous, horrible place to visit. You had your life in your own hands. Now there's a Starbucks every couple blocks on Colfax. There are dispensaries literally every 2 to 3 blocks. Grocery stores have popped up. Home prices have climbed. New development, new construction in those areas has gone up. So there's an economic engine that cannabis is driving. And so we can talk about all of that. There's a lot happening. The fight is not over. It's really just beginning with states like California and dealing with the federal government. So we've got a lot happening, lots of moving parts. And I can promise you this, as simple as we all think it is, there is no simplicity to the solution. Legalization is complicated. There are lots of hands in the cookie jar as far as revenue and where tax dollars go and what happens to Medicare and Medicaid when that happens. What do we do when this product is in the marketplace and patients and veterans can get access to it constantly? That's going to be a really good thing for a lot of us. It's also going to be really bad for high profit businesses like pharmaceutical companies. And so we're going to have to deal with that. We can't just put our heads in the sand and think there's a switch to flip. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to everyone else, but thank you, and I'll answer a lot of all your questions as well.